For my 70th birthday, my family threw me a beautiful party, but it was all an elaborate trap. They tried to trick me into signing away my entire life savings, thinking I was just a clueless old woman. My own son and his greedy wife smiled to my face, using my love for them as a weapon to seize control of everything I owned. But they made one critical mistake. They forgot I spent 40 years in banking, and I was about to use their little party to give them a lesson they would never, ever forget. 70 years. You'd think by the time you reach 70, life would hold fewer surprises. You'd think you'd have seen every angle, understood every motivation, and earned a measure of peace. My garden was in full bloom, the house was filled with the warm chatter of friends and family, and the late afternoon sun was casting a golden glow over my Westchester lawn. It was by all accounts a perfect birthday party. But something was off. A subtle, discordant note hummed beneath the melody of the celebration, and it was coming from my daughter-in-law, Jess. She was playing the part of the devoted daughter, beautifully flitting from guest to guest, with a tray of champagne flutes, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. But I saw the tension in her shoulders and the way her fingers were clamped so tightly around the stem of her own glass that her knuckles were white. Her laughter was just a little too loud, a little too sharp. It was the frantic energy of someone trying to hold a carefully constructed world together with sheer force of will. I'd seen it before in my years at the bank. It was the look of desperation wearing a very expensive dress. My son, Chris, seemed oblivious, beaming beside his wife. He's a good man, my son, with a heart more trusting than his mother's. He saw a vibrant, successful woman, the perfect partner to build a life with. I saw a woman terrified of a bill coming due. Then came the gift. In the middle of a lull, Jess and Chris presented me with a large, elegantly wrapped box. I was expecting a cashmere throw, or perhaps a first edition book. Instead, inside the layers of tissue paper was a heavy, leather-bound folder. Jess took it from the box with a practiced reverence. She explained in a voice loud enough for the nearest guests to hear that it was a legacy gift. She said they'd been working with a new, more dynamic financial advisor who had recommended they update and streamline my estate planning. She used words like optimization and proactive asset management, framing it as the ultimate act of care, a way to protect me from the complexities of the modern financial world. A cold prickle of unease traced its way down my spine. My financial affairs were already in impeccable order, managed by the same man who had handled my late husband's estate for 30 years. But Chris was looking at me with such earnestness, his expression full of love and concern. He told me they were just trying to take care of me to make my life easier. And what mother can say no to that face? So amidst the clinking glasses and happy chatter, with the scent of my own birthday cake hanging in the air, Jess handed me a heavy gold-plated pen. She pointed to the signature lines, calling it a simple formality we could handle before we cut the cake. I looked at my son, and his reassuring smile was all it took. I pushed down that flicker of professional doubt, the banker in me screaming to read the fine print, and I signed the papers. A simple act, a stroke of a pen. A little while later, wanting to share a memory of my husband, I excused myself and walked to the quiet of my study to find an old photo album. The door to the adjoining powder room was slightly ajar, and as I reached for the bookshelf, I heard Jess's voice. It was not the smooth, charming tone she used for the party guests. This was a harsh, panicked whisper, ragged with fear. I froze, my hand hovering in the air. The words came through the door in sharp, terrifying fragments. She said the payment was late. She hissed that she told someone she'd have access by Monday. Then the words that turned the blood in my veins to ice. No, she signed it. It's done. Just give me more time. In that silent, sunlit room, the happy sounds of my own birthday party filtering in from the lawn felt like they were from another world. The leather folder, the polished speech, my son's trusting face, it all snapped into a horrifyingly clear picture. This wasn't an act of love. It wasn't a gesture of care. It was a hostile takeover. And I had just signed the surrender. By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now, let's get back to it. For a long moment, I just stood there in the quiet of my study, the sound of my own heartbeat loud in my ears. The cheerful noise from the party seemed a universe away. The shock was a physical thing, a wave of ice water that washed over me, leaving a cold, hard clarity in its wake. There was no room for tears or for rage. 30 years in the world of finance had taught me one thing. When you discover a hostile takeover in progress, you don't panic. You act. I smoothed the front of my dress, took a slow, steadying breath, and walked back into the party. My face was a perfect mask of polite festivity. I saw my son Chris standing by the bar, laughing with one of his cousins. He was the weak link. Not because he was malicious, but because he was ignorant of the details, a willing pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. I walked over, my smile warm and maternal. Jess, ever watchful, immediately drifted closer, her own smile plastered on her face. With her in earshot, I touched Chris's arm and asked him a question, my tone light and conversational. I told him I was just thinking about those papers. I asked if he could remind me about the specific clause regarding the capital gains tax on the trust's real estate assets, because I didn't recall seeing it. The effect was immediate. Chris's face went completely blank. He has many wonderful qualities, but a detailed understanding of tax law is not one of them. He just blinked at me, utterly lost. Before he could even stammer out a response, Jess swooped in, her voice artificially bright. She told me not to worry my head about all those boring details, that it was my birthday. But I didn't let it go. I pressed gently, saying I was sure it was fine, I'd just feel better if I understood. That's when her composure started to crack. She launched into a tangled, convoluted explanation, throwing around financial jargon like a child splashing in a puddle. The problem was, the term she was using directly contradicted the simple, streamlined pitch she'd given me earlier. It was a clumsy, amateurish lie, and in the space of 30 seconds, she had exposed herself completely. While she was still fumbling for words, trying to patch the holes in her story, I saw my opening. I discreetly pulled out my phone, pretending to smile at a newly arrived birthday text. With my thumb, I typed out a short, urgent message to my lawyer of 3 decades, Gabriel Cole. The message was simple, a prearranged signal we'd established years ago for just this kind of emergency. It read, "Problem at the house. Code red. Come now. Use the back gate." I hit send. My most powerful ally was on his way. Jess must have seen the flicker of cold resolve in my eyes. Her frantic explanation died in her throat as she watched me slip my phone back into my handbag. Her panic flared, and in a desperate move to regain control, she stepped forward and placed a hand on mine. She said it so sweetly for everyone to hear. "Mom, please, no business tonight." She insisted on holding onto my phone for me, just so I could relax and enjoy my party. Before I could object, she plucked it from my hand with a brilliant smile. And just like that, I was isolated. The atmosphere, once festive, was now charged and oppressive. I understood then that this wasn't just about money. It was a dangerous game of control, and I had just been cut off from the outside world. With my phone gone, I was a queen under house arrest at my own party. To fight back would have been a mistake. It would have shown my hand and given Jess a reason to escalate things, perhaps by ending the party and getting me isolated for real. So I did the opposite. I played into the role she wanted for me. I let out a small sigh, pressed my fingers to my temple, and allowed a look of faint exhaustion to cross my face. I murmured something about all the excitement being a bit much for an old woman. It worked perfectly. My son, Chris, immediately rushed to my side, his face a mask of concern. Jess, ever the dutiful daughter-in-law, guided me to a plush armchair in the corner of the room, suggesting I rest for a while. As I settled into the cushions, I saw them exchange a look over my head, a quick, sharp glance of pure relief. They thought my pointed questions and strange mood had just been a moment of elderly confusion, a brief storm that had now passed. They believed their plan was secure. They were wrong. As I sat there smiling graciously at anyone who glanced my way, my mind was running at 1,000 miles an hour. I tried to picture the kind of desperation that would drive a person to commit such a blatant act of fraud against their own family. In my years at the bank, I'd seen it all. I could almost visualize Jess's life as a stack of hidden credit card statements, the interest compounding daily, each one a silent scream for help. I pictured her deleting frantic emails from high-interest lenders, her heart pounding every time the phone rang. I imagined the raw, ugly phone call from a creditor, the threats veiled just enough to be legal, the shame so thick she could barely breathe. She was a woman drowning in a sea of her own bad choices, and my life savings looked like the only life raft in sight. It didn't excuse what she was doing, not for a second. But for the first time, I understood the sheer terror that was fueling her. But terror makes you sloppy. And she had no idea what she was up against. While I appeared to be resting, I was mentally walking through the financial fortress my late husband and I had built with Gabriel Cole years ago. It wasn't just a will, it was a masterpiece of legal defense. I reviewed the intricate structure of our revocable trust, a living entity designed to protect our assets from predators both outside the family and within. I recalled the specific clauses we'd insisted on, the one requiring a notarized physician's statement of mental competency for any major changes, the one that triggered an automatic review by a 3-person board if any single beneficiary's role was altered. The document I had signed was a worthless piece of paper. It was a child's drawing of a key trying to open a bank vault. My signature meant nothing without a half-dozen other steps, none of which Jess could ever hope to accomplish. I wasn't panicking. I was simply waiting for my cavalry to arrive. And then Jess made her second critical mistake of the evening, born of pure, unadulterated arrogance. Believing me to be neutralized a frail old woman dozing in a chair, she began to perform her new role as the heir apparent. She gathered a small circle of influential cousins and family friends and began talking, her voice low but confident about the future. She spoke of our plans for the estate and how she and Chris were preparing to take on more responsibility to ensure the family legacy continued. She was auditioning for my role right in front of me. I watched her, my eyes half closed, and I mentally noted every single person she was speaking to. They were no longer just party guests. They were witnesses. Jess was holding court near the grand piano, a glass of champagne in one hand, gesturing gracefully with the other. She was in her element, basking in the attention of my cousins, spinning a lovely fantasy about her, and Chris taking a more active role in managing the family's future. The arrogance was breathtaking. She saw a frail old woman in a chair. She had no idea she was a fly caught in a web, and the spider was patiently waiting. I saw him before anyone else did. Gabriel Cole didn't make a grand entrance. Just as I'd instructed, he came quietly through the open French doors of the back patio, looking for all the world like a distinguished guest who was fashionably late. He was holding a small gift-wrapped box. He walked directly to me, bent down and gave me a warm hug, wishing me a happy birthday. Then, as he straightened up, his gaze swept the room and landed on Jess and Chris. Gabriel has a very calm, very analytical way of looking at people, the kind of gaze that sees right through polished exteriors to the shaky foundations beneath. Jess's triumphant smile faltered. The color drained from her face. His unexpected presence was a bucket of ice water on her performance, and she knew it instantly. After a moment, I asked Gabriel if he wouldn't mind taking a look at the wonderful legacy gift Jess and Chris had given me. I gestured toward the leather-bound folder on the side table. He picked it up, gave them a polite, unreadable nod, and disappeared into my study. The next 5 minutes were the longest of my life. The party continued, but a bubble of cold tension had formed around me, Chris, and a visibly trembling Jess. Then Gabriel's head appeared at the study door, and he quietly called for Jess and Chris to join him. I couldn't hear what was said, but I didn't need to. A few minutes later, a sound cut through the wall, a single strangled sob. It was the sound of a complete and utter collapse. When I finally walked into the study, the scene was one of total devastation. Gabriel was sitting calmly behind my desk, the offending documents spread before him. Jess was crumpled in a chair, her sophisticated facade shattered, replaced by the raw, ugly face of desperation. She was confessing everything in a torrent of broken words, the mountains of credit card debt to maintain their lifestyle, the threatening calls from personal lenders, the crippling, suffocating shame of it all. She had seen my assets not as a family legacy, but as her only way out. The confession created an immediate earthquake, and my son was at its epicenter. Chris was standing frozen, his face pale with horror. He was staring at his wife as if he'd never seen her before. He wasn't a co-conspirator. He was the fool who had been played by everyone. The trust between them didn't just crack, it vaporized. I saw the realization dawn in his eyes that this wasn't some misguided attempt to help me. This was fraud. He finally recoiled from her, his voice a choked whisper, asking her what she had done. That was my cue. I stepped fully into the room, no longer a victim, no longer a frail woman feigning weakness. I was a figure of absolute authority in my own home. I looked at the weeping Jess and my stunned son, and I felt nothing but a cold, profound disappointment. Jess started to plead with me, but I ignored her completely. My voice when I spoke was devoid of all emotion. I told them both to clean themselves up. I told them we were rejoining the party because our guests deserved an explanation for the scene they were about to witness. With that one command, I dictated the terms of what was to come, leaving them powerless, stripped of their lies, and utterly terrified of the public reckoning that was now just moments away. Walking back into the living room was like leading two prisoners to their own sentencing. Jess was ashen, her earlier confidence replaced by a hollow, vacant look. My son, Chris, walked with the stiff, shell-shocked gait of a man who had just watched his entire world collapse. I stood in the center of the room, Gabriel a quiet, solid presence by my side, and I asked for the music to be turned down. A confused silence fell over my guests. They looked from me to the pale, trembling couple standing beside me like defendants. My voice when I spoke was calm and steady, carrying easily through the suddenly quiet room. I thanked everyone for coming to celebrate with me. I told them that it seemed this birthday had become a pivotal moment for our family in more ways than one. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Anger is a messy, inefficient tool. I preferred precision. I began by explaining that my son and daughter-in-law had presented me with a very special gift earlier in the evening, a set of documents concerning my estate. Then I deferred to my expert. I let Gabriel explain in clear, simple terms the fraudulent nature of the papers Jess had tricked me into signing. He detailed how the document was an amateurish attempt to grant Jess control over assets that were, in fact, secured within an ironclad revocable trust. He explained that the trust my late husband and I had created required a multi-stage verification process to alter, including a notarized mental competency evaluation from a board-certified physician. He didn't accuse, he simply stated the facts. And then he delivered the final devastating blow. He explained to my friends and my family that Jess's actions constituted a textbook case of attempted financial elder abuse. A collective gasp went through the room. The judgment didn't come from me. It came from the dozens of pairs of eyes that were now fixed on Jess. The shocked, disappointed stares from the very people she had been so desperate to impress were the true punishment. The cousins she'd boasted to the family friends she'd charmed their silent condemnation was absolute. In that moment, all the social standing she had clawed and lied and cheated to maintain was stripped away, leaving her exposed, not as a clever strategist, but as a cheap, desperate criminal. With the truth laid bare and the verdict rendered by her peers, all that was left was the sentencing. My voice was quiet but firm, each word a carefully placed stone, building a new, unbreakable wall. I looked directly at my daughter-in-law. I told her, "Jess, you have 10 minutes to leave my house." Then I turned to my son, whose face was a ruin of shame and betrayal. I told him, "Chris, I will fund a top-tier forensic accountant and a lawyer to help you create a post-nuptial agreement that insulates you and the family from your wife's debt. If you refuse this offer, the locks on this house will be changed tomorrow, and you will be written out of the trust." I had reclaimed total legal and moral control. My home, my legacy, and my boundaries were once again firmly my own. The silence that followed my words was the loudest sound I had ever heard. For a moment, no one moved. Then Jess let out a choked, ragged sob, and without another word she turned, grabbed her purse from a chair, and practically fled from the room. There was no final confrontation, no desperate plea. There was only the sound of her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood floor and the slam of the front door. Her 10 minutes were up in less than one. The party, my 70th birthday party, dissolved in a matter of minutes. Guests offered awkward, whispered goodbyes, their eyes full of a mixture of pity and shock, none of them knowing what to say. Soon, the house was quiet. Chris was left standing alone in the middle of the living room, a solitary figure, amidst the debris of a celebration, finally forced to confront the catastrophic consequences of his own willful blindness. A few months passed. The autumn leaves turned from gold to brown and began to fall. I heard through the family grapevine that Jess's life had imploded just as she'd feared. The friends she had worked so hard to cultivate vanished, and the creditors she had been hiding from were no longer patient. She was facing the full weight of her choices entirely alone. Chris, to his credit, made his choice. A week after the party, he called Gabriel and accepted my offer. The process was brutal. The forensic accountant uncovered a staggering amount of debt, a secret life of financial desperation that left my son speechless. The post-nuptial agreement moved forward, creating a permanent bitter rift in his marriage, the final outcome of which was still uncertain. He started seeing a financial counselor not just for the money, but to understand how he had allowed himself to be so thoroughly deceived. It was the beginning of a slow, difficult path toward accountability. As for me, I was thriving. With the oppressive weight of Jess's anxiety and ambition gone from my life, It felt as though I could finally breathe again. I reconnected with old friends from my banking days and joined a community gardening group I'd been meaning to look into for years. My home was no longer a stage for someone else's social aspirations. It was a sanctuary. I hosted a small dinner party, not a lavish affair like my birthday, but an intimate gathering of people I trusted, people whose laughter was genuine. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I'd lost my authority and independence, not just reestablished, but reinforced. One crisp Saturday afternoon, I was in my garden, pruning the last of the autumn roses. The air was cool and clean. I heard the back gate open and saw Chris standing there, waiting at a respectful distance. He looked older, tired, but the oblivious look was gone from his eyes, replaced by something more thoughtful. He didn't come to ask for forgiveness or to make excuses. He simply told me about his last session with the counselor, reporting on his progress as if he were giving a business update. It was a first small step, a gesture, to show me he was doing the work. I paused. My pruning looked at him and gave a single, slow nod. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement of his effort. As he turned and left, I went back to my roses, the sharp, clean snip of the shears, a satisfying sound in the quiet afternoon. I was strong, I was wise, and I was in complete control of my own life, having transformed the deepest pain of betrayal into the quiet wisdom of self-preservation. In the end, Barbara's victory wasn't rooted in anger, but in a profound and clear-eyed understanding. She saw that her daughter-in-law's cruel actions were driven by the pathetic, frantic terror of a woman drowning in debt and shame. This empathy didn't soften her resolve, it sharpened it. Because she understood the desperation, she knew the attack was not personal, but opportunistic. Her response was therefore not a raging battle, but a calm surgical removal of a threat. The truest lesson was that wisdom isn't just about recognizing betrayal, but about understanding the weakness that fuels it and setting boundaries of unbreakable steel.